When was the last time you sat in complete silence and asked yourself, who am I becoming when no one is watching? Not the version of you that performs for approval, not the one carefully constructed to meet expectations, not the polished image you present online or in conversation, but the one that lives quietly beneath every mask you have ever worn. Carl Jung spent a lifetime studying this exact question. He came to a conclusion that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The greatest tragedy is not failure, not loss, not even death. The greatest tragedy is to reach the end of your life and realize you never became who you truly were. You lived as a carefully managed performance, a collection of roles, a series of adaptations, and somewhere along the way, the real person disappeared beneath them. We live in an age that celebrates productivity, appearance, and constant motion. From the moment we wake, we are trained to chase goals that were never ours, to collect achievements that leave us strangely empty, and to measure our worth by how well we fit into systems that were never designed for the human soul. We become experts at surviving, yet remain amateurs at living. We learn how to be useful, how to be likable, how to be impressive, but we forget how to be real. Jung called the process of becoming who we are meant to be individuation. It is not self-improvement in the modern sense. It is not about becoming more successful, more attractive, more disciplined, or more impressive. Individuation is the slow, often painful, and ultimately liberating journey of separating who you truly are from who the world told you to be. It is the lifelong work of becoming whole. Most people never take this journey. They live their entire lives identified with the persona, the social mask Jung described as the face we present to the world. The persona is useful. It helps us function in society. It allows us to hold jobs, maintain relationships, and move through the world without constant conflict. But when we confuse the mask with the face beneath it, something essential begins to die while we are still breathing. That quiet emptiness you sometimes feel, even when everything on the outside looks fine. That is not depression, not lack of gratitude, not a character flaw, not a sign that you need to try harder. That is the self-calling, the deeper center of your being that refuses to be ignored forever. It speaks through restlessness, through sudden sadness that has no clear source, through the sense that you are living someone else's life, through the quiet question that returns in the middle of the night. Is this all there is? Jung believed that the psyche is always moving toward wholeness. Whether you cooperate or not, the unconscious will continue its work. If you refuse to listen, it will speak through symptoms, anxiety that has no clear cause, restlessness that no achievement can quiet, relationships that keep repeating the same painful pattern, a sense that life is happening to you rather than through you. The psyche does not stop trying to correct the imbalance. It only becomes more insistent. The question is not whether the call will come. The question is whether you will answer it. Take an honest look at your life right now. How much of what you do is driven by the fear of being seen as ordinary, unsuccessful, or disappointing? How many of your choices are made to protect an image rather than to honor a truth? How often do you silence a quiet inner knowing because it would require change that feels too costly, too uncertain, or too disruptive to the life you have carefully built? Jung warned that the more we identify with the persona, the more the shadow grows in the dark. Everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, our anger, our envy, our longing, our capacity for both greatness and destruction, our vulnerability, our need, our unfinished grief, does not disappear. It waits, and the longer it waits, the more power it gathers. The shadow is not evil, it is simply the rejected. And what is rejected does not vanish. It influences us from the unseen. Individuation requires that we turn toward what we have spent years avoiding. It asks us to meet the parts of ourselves we find inconvenient, shameful, frightening, or simply too much. This is not self-indulgence. It is not wallowing. It is the only path to genuine freedom, because what we refuse to face continues to shape our choices from the shadows. What we integrate becomes available as strength, clarity, and depth. When you begin this work, something subtle but profound begins to shift. You stop needing the world to confirm your worth with the same desperation. You no longer chase validation as if your survival depends on it. The opinions of others lose their ability to dictate your inner weather. You start making decisions from a deeper place, not from fear of loss, not from hunger for praise, not from the need to maintain an image, but from quiet alignment with what feels true. This does not mean life becomes easy. In many ways, it becomes more demanding. The people around you may resist your change. Some will call you selfish. Others will quietly distance themselves because the version of you they needed no longer exists. Relationships that were built on mutual performance may collapse under the weight of honesty. Careers that once defined you may begin to feel hollow. The roles that once gave you a sense of identity may start to feel like costumes that no longer fit. Jung understood this resistance intimately. He knew that the path toward the self is rarely celebrated by the collective. Society prefers people who remain predictable, useful, and slightly asleep. The moment you begin waking up, you become harder to control, and that makes others uncomfortable. Your growth may feel like a threat to those who are still deeply invested in the old arrangement. Yet the alternative is far more costly. To spend decades living as a carefully managed performance is to slowly starve the soul. The emptiness grows. The restlessness intensifies. The sense of living behind glass, watching your own life rather than inhabiting it, becomes harder to ignore. And eventually, life itself begins to feel like a role you never auditioned for, a script you never agreed to follow. The work of individuation is not dramatic. It rarely looks heroic from the outside. It happens in small, private moments. The moment you tell the truth, when silence would have been easier. The moment you walk away from a situation that flatters your ego but drains your spirit. The moment you sit with an uncomfortable feeling instead of distracting yourself from it. The moment you admit that the life you built no longer fits the person you are becoming. The moment you stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. The moment you choose solitude over company that requires you to shrink. These moments accumulate. Over time, they form a different kind of strength. Not the brittle strength of willpower and image management, but the quiet, unshakable strength of someone who has met themselves and chosen to stay. It is a strength that does not need to announce itself. It simply is. Jung described the self as the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, known and unknown, masculine and feminine, personal and collective. It is not the ego. The ego is only a small island in a vast ocean. Individuation is the process of learning to navigate that ocean, rather than pretending the island is the entire world. It is the movement from a limited, defended sense of identity toward a larger, more inclusive, more truthful one. As you move closer to the self, synchronicities often increase. Meaningful coincidences appear with greater frequency. The right book arrives at the exact moment you need its particular insight. A conversation shifts something that had been stuck for years. An ending occurs just as you become ready to release what no longer belongs. A new beginning appears when the old structure has finally loosened its grip. This is not magic in the superficial sense. It is the outer world beginning to reflect an inner reordering. When the psyche moves toward greater coherence, reality tends to rearrange itself in support of that movement. But do not romanticize the process. There will be periods of disorientation. There will be days when the old identity has dissolved and the new one has not yet solidified. Jung called these times the dark night of the soul, not as punishment, not as failure, but as necessary transition. The old structures must loosen before something more authentic can take form. In these periods, the ground feels uncertain. The familiar ways of defining yourself no longer work, and the deeper truth has not yet fully revealed itself. This is the in-between space, and it can feel like loss, even when it is actually liberation in process. In these periods, the temptation to return to the familiar mask is strong. The persona is comfortable. It is known. It has social rewards. It offers a clear script. The self offers no such guarantees. It offers only truth, and truth is rarely convenient. It does not promise ease. It promises reality, and reality, once fully faced, is more livable than any carefully maintained illusion. Yet every time you choose truth over comfort, something irreversible happens. A layer of falsehood falls away. The distance between who you are and who you pretend to be grows smaller. And with that reduction comes a form of peace that no external achievement can provide. This peace is not the absence of difficulty. It is the presence of alignment. You can face uncertainty without collapsing into despair. You can experience rejection without questioning your fundamental worth. You can fail at something and still remain intact because your identity is no longer fused to outcomes, roles, or the approval of others. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of psychological development is not happiness in the ordinary sense, but meaning. And meaning is found only when a person lives in conscious relationship with the deeper layers of their own being. Happiness can be taken away. Meaning endures. Meaning is what remains when the outer structures shift, when the applause fades, when the roles change, when life does not go according to plan. Meaning is what allows a person to continue standing when everything familiar has been rearranged. Look at the areas of your life that feel stagnant or heavy. Where are you still performing? Where are you still bargaining with yourself, promising that you will become honest later, once conditions are safer, once you have more security, once the people around you are ready? Later rarely comes. The conditions for authenticity are almost never perfect. The decision must be made in the middle of the mess, while the ground is still uncertain, while fear is still present, while the old life still has its claims on you. You do not need to burn your entire life down overnight. Individuation is rarely a single dramatic act of rebellion. It is a series of small, consistent choices to stop abandoning yourself. It is the decision to listen when something inside says, "This is not right." It is the willingness to disappoint others rather than continue disappointing the person you are meant to become. It is the practice of returning again and again to the quiet center that knows what is true for you, even when the outer world is loud with other demands. As you do this work, your relationships begin to change in quality. You attract fewer people who need you to remain small, and more people who can meet you as you are. The conversations deepen. The connections that remain become more real. You stop collecting people as evidence of your worth and start recognizing kindred spirits, those who are also walking the path of becoming, those who do not require you to perform in order to belong. The relationships that cannot survive your growth will fall away, and though this can be painful, it is also clarifying. What remains is more honest. You also become less interested in controlling how others perceive you. The exhausting project of managing your image loses its urgency. In its place grows a quieter confidence, the confidence of someone who no longer needs to be impressive because they have already met themselves. This confidence does not need to convince. It does not need to defend. It simply occupies its own space, without apology. This is what Jung meant when he said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who your parents needed you to be, not who your culture rewards, not who your fears demand, not who your wounds have trained you to remain. Who you are, the fuller, deeper, more integrated version of yourself that has been waiting beneath the adaptations. The journey is long. It has no final destination where the work is finished and the self is complete. There is always more to integrate, more to understand, more to release, more to bring into conscious relationship. But there comes a point when the struggle changes character. You are no longer fighting against yourself. You are cooperating with the deeper movement of your own psyche. The resistance softens. The inner war quiets. What remains is a different kind of effort. The effort of remaining true rather than the effort of remaining hidden. That cooperation is the beginning of a different kind of life. One that feels less like a performance and more like a living truth, one in which your outer actions begin to match your inner reality, one in which you can look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back, not as a stranger or a carefully constructed character, but as someone you are finally willing to know. You already know, on some level, what this work is asking of you. The restlessness, the recurring questions, the quiet dissatisfaction that achievements cannot silence, the sense that something essential is missing, even when the checklist of a good life is complete. These are not problems to be solved with more effort, more discipline, more positivity, or more achievement. They are invitations. They are the psyche's way of saying, there is more of you still waiting to be lived. The only question that remains is whether you will keep postponing the answer. Life is too short to spend it as a well-adjusted stranger to yourself. The masks can be useful for a time. They help us survive childhood, navigate social systems, and protect what is still tender. Eventually, if we cling to them too tightly, they become prisons. Jung's entire body of work points toward one essential freedom, the freedom to become real. Not perfect, not finished, not free of struggle, real. That freedom is available. It has always been available. It does not require permission from anyone else. It does not require ideal circumstances. It requires only the willingness to turn inward with honesty, to stay with what you find even when it is uncomfortable, and to keep choosing the path that leads closer to the self rather than further away from it. If this message has reached a place inside you that has been waiting to be acknowledged, sit with it. Do not rush past it into the next distraction. The next step does not need to be dramatic. It only needs to be true. One honest conversation, one boundary spoken, one quiet decision to stop abandoning yourself in a particular area of your life. These small acts of fidelity to yourself accumulate into a different existence. And if you feel called to continue this exploration, subscribe to Carl Jung philosophy and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss the next reflection. Share this with someone who may be standing at the same quiet crossroads, someone who has been living behind a well-constructed mask and is beginning to sense that the cost has become too high. Remember, the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. Everything else, every connection, every creation, every contribution, grows from the quality of that relationship. When you stop abandoning yourself, you become capable of a different kind of presence in the world. When you become real, you give others permission to do the same. The time to begin becoming who you are is not someday, when conditions improve, when fear subsides, when the people around you are ready. It is now.